The Southern Alberta Council on Public Affairs acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains, and we pay respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. We offer respect to the Métis and all who have lived on this land and made Lethbridge their home.
So our speaker today is Derek Tallow, Program Director of Secure Your Food, or SYF program. Secure Your Food was created as an example program to address food insecurity while Derek performed his final social work practicum at the City of Lethbridge's Community Social Development. Derek's presentation is entitled, "Why Will Your Food Prices Remain Elevated?" Some good news that we need to hear today, don't we, after? Please welcome Derek. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name, again, is Derek Tallow. Just to give you a little background about Secure Your Food is basically we want to improve your access to nutritious foods. Food security is defined as your access to foods, good or bad. So currently with our, with what we see within the food system is that the foods that are available to the public is not necessarily the healthiest, and the foods that we need to maintain or increase our health is actually expensive and kind of not very accessible. So we have our own little definition of food security. So basically we want you to have access to nutritious, healthy and wholesome foods. Now, with nutritious, we mean basically something that's very good for your body. Healthy, we want to have that be able to address all the facets of your health. So that's mental, physical, spiritual. And then wholesome foods, meaning that foods that are natural to your body. And what I mean by that is that, say for example, First Nations, we didn't really have access to, I guess you could call it colonial foods. And you guys have had probably more exposure to grains and milk, something that I don't have naturally. And so it has a little bit harder for me to digest than it would for you. So that's where the wholesome part comes in. But the presentation that I'm going to be talking about is in concerns our view of things going forward in terms of prices and also in terms of what is going to happen with our food going forward. And for the most part, we are largely reactive to the changes that will happen in our food system. And the purpose of my presentation here today is to kind of give you an idea of what's going to happen, because we are standing at the beginning of fundamental changes to our food system, to all systems actually. And that will have a change that will occur within all systems and actually the globe. So I just want to, some of the topics I'll be talking about are a little distressing, but I want to assure you that for us in North America, we will be fine. We will have access to foods. So as a result, food prices will continue to remain elevated for quite a while. But in some cases, the specialty foods, the exotic foods may become unavailable. And in the case of a certain war, which I will talk about later, certain foods may become unavailable. So I just kind of want to give you an idea of where we started to begin with. There's a lot of data points and a lot of information that we look at, and a lot of it was something that we were thinking about and wondering why things happen the way they are. And so a lot of these different data points from different fields, different studies, different perspectives kind of told us something was wrong. And the reason why I'm going to kind of lean a little bit heavily on Peter Zeihan. He's a geopolitical strategist who talks about how we came to have the world we are living in right now and participating in. So he's a geopolitical strategist who has a hypothesis in which he says that after the Second World War, the United States created an economic alliance to counter the Soviet persuasion in the world. And the result of that was globalization. And so with the historical context with that in Peter's mind was that if you were a world power, or sorry, an empire, you had three things going for you. One, you had people. Two, you had resources. Three, you had technologies. So the empires at the time, pre-World War I, had all three. And so if you didn't have one of the three, you were most likely a colony. And so after the Second World War, the whole order changed from regional powers to global. And that's how we got globalism. So any countries across the world were able to access raw materials if they lacked it, or technology if they lacked it, and they were able to economically grow. And that's how we have the whole system that we have today. Now, unfortunately, that system is not really conducive to human health, mainly because the orientation right now, as we examine it, isn't for profit. Its orientation is for efficiency. And so it doesn't really allow for food to be specialized. So that's one of the things that we have identified going forward, that it creates social inequalities and also adverse health conditions depending on where you go. So basically the research has shown that any populations, let's say indigenous populations outside of North America adopting a Western food diet starts to have adverse health outcomes beyond the normal. But what helped globalism to happen was the population explosion that occurred after the Second World War, and that was the adoption of, or the invention of, synthetic fertilizers. So basically, there's a certain profile of soils that can support growing foods, certain foods. But with synthetic fertilizers, you're able to take the soil that is subpar for agricultural use and use it to be able to grow more food. So you see a lot of that heavy use being used in South America, Europe, and Asia. So basically we're at where we are pre-COVID. So in 2017, when this program started, my main focus was to understand what is going on with our food systems. And so we employed a systemic perspective and be able to look at why we have food insecurity basically in our city when I was at CSD. And don't get me wrong, the aid agencies, the food banks, the churches, and other organizations that provide food relief do a great job. But we largely identified it as a systemic issue, and I'll get to a little bit more about that later. But what I want to bring to you is the Belmore hypothesis regarding food prices. And we have an example of that was applied to the Arab Spring in 2011, in which a number of dictatorships were overthrown by their people through social unrest. And at the time, the media was largely, American media was largely saying it was due to the people's desire for democracy. But it was actually, what Belmar proposed was rising food prices across the world, staple food prices. So basically people who could not afford food. So pre-2011, 40% of the US's output in corn was diverted for biofuels, and that spiked prices across the world. And so the same factors that Belmar proposed were also seen pre-Ukraine-Russia war. And that is something that we've been, it's very interesting in terms of what we use to see what happens in the world when it comes to world food prices, what can cause prices to spike, the various things that can happen. And this is something that has largely been favorable for us to identify what's going on and to be able to create mitigations based on that. And I'll get to that later. But we were able to know that COVID was an issue in December of 2019. By January 2020, we were able to inform those that we were associated with that a pandemic was coming. And in February, we were warning people on our social media to prepare. We didn't say anything before because we didn't want to create a panic, but the resources we have in what we look at with food actually gives us a good idea of what's going on in the world. So we knew in 2017 that food was going to become a problem, and COVID applied supply issues across the world, and it magnified the vulnerabilities within our food system, which resulted in food prices increasing and also impacts on our agricultural, because the materials that we need that were transported need to maintain and grow our foods, they were also affected. Now the thing with the Ukraine war is that it affected, sanctions were imposed upon Russia, and in response to that, Russia along with Belarus was one of the main exporters of easy synthetic fertilizers to the world. So going back to this map here, a lot of the countries began stockpiling fertilizers, and there was a spike in fertilizer prices and whatnot. And right now we could possibly see a return to pre-synthetic growing, synthetic fertilizer growing. And that is something that is concerning to us, and in terms of what it's going to do for the world, but not for North America. So we have enough fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We have our own supplies that we are able to access, and that are being developed in response to the export of synthetic fertilizers by Russia, but also China as well. So when I say we're going to be fine in North America, we're going to be fine, but for the rest of the world, unfortunately, that is going to become more of a problem. So ever since 2008, we've seen an increase in food prices and food spike prices in regards to the cost of foods across the world. And so it's kind of interesting when we go back to the Belmar hypothesis about rising food prices, which leads to social unrest. And we're seeing that all across the world in South America, Africa, Middle East, Europe, even everywhere. Food prices are increasing and people are reacting. So right now, there is a current assumption going on with our systems. I'm talking about basically climate change and what it's doing to our systems. So our current system was built with the assumption of a couple of things. One of them being that everything will return to normal. Another is that growth will continue. Unfortunately, before COVID, climate change is doing a number on our systems. So our food systems, our food production systems was operating with the assumption that stable conditions would continue, but as we can see with insurance data that we have here, that since about the 70s, we see an increase in extreme weather events, meteorological events, disaster events occurring. And that's all beginning to take a toll that's becoming more noticeable within the reporting data given out by the United States Department of Agriculture, Statistics Canada, and whatnot across the world. And it's beginning to affect food production in various countries. This graph here is on extreme weather, and we see a 7 times increase in extreme weather events. Now, when we look at food production and climate change, we see that our climate has become more harsher, and it's getting harder and harder to grow foods. And there is as a result of that, there are industry experts who look at these statistics given out by the USDA and Statistics Canada, and there is some wonder among them about the accuracy of the reporting that's going on. And some of the things that we've looked at, looking at statistics for food production in our country, we've kind of noticed some things happen. And it's kind of concerning to us because it's not an accurate reflection of what's going on out there with growing and the reporting of that. And one of the things that we are concerned about is the Canada Food Price Index. Now, when we started looking at it, the base rate of that 100% was in 2002. And if you look at the graph here, since the end of the pandemic in 2023, you've noticed that prices, or the inflation rate has gone down. But if you look at the metrics of the Canada Food Price Index, they've changed depending on what category you're looking at to a rate of 2022, meaning that this is not an accurate reflection of the inflation rate. And I think, you know, as we all go grocery shopping, that food prices have not come down. In fact, they have gone up. And that is something that we believe is done more as a way of maintaining stability within our systems. So that is something that we're looking at right now. But that is what it is at the moment right now. Prices will remain elevated. And now I'm going to talk to you about why things are going to go a little bit bad, I guess. So Peter Zion is a geopolitical strategist who touches upon a lot of topics, and one of the reasons why I think his hypothesis is compelling is because of two main points. One being a population decline and its effect on our systems, and also on, well, I'll just kind of concentrate on this. But basically his premise is that we ran out of young people years ago. Coincidentally, around the fall of the Soviet Union, the countries of the world began stop having kids. So right now we have the assumption that going forward that growth will continue, but we don't have enough people, young people, to continue our present level of economic activity. So that is a problem. Globalization has also been in decline over the recent years, mainly because, according to Peter, how we get our food, how we transport resources across the planet has been protected by the U.S. Navy. And the U.S. Navy has been in a presence in all the sea lanes, major sea lanes, since the end of the World War. And now we're seeing that the U.S. Navy is beginning to not be there. One example of that is in Africa, in the trade routes there being preyed upon by pirates and whatnot. So one of the reasons why that is occurring is that the U.S. doesn't see value in maintaining those systems anymore because it's not within their ability to maintain or pay for, because it simply does not benefit them. And I think we're seeing that a lot, especially being accelerated with Trump coming in with the trade tariffs, with the removal of support in Ukraine for the actions there. It's becoming very concerned to us because it will further stop what we have in the form of globalism. And so another thing is that our demographics profile will not support our present activity going forward. This is the Canadian profile. But basically, you guys have done a great job of having us here. But unfortunately, we've grown, I guess you could say, too big for ourselves. And as a result, we simply just didn't have enough people being born after 30 years ago. So The whole world has a similar profile to this, and some have more, it's like an inverted pyramid, this demographics profile. And what it means is that you have a larger population here, but less replacement. And so what that means is that we're not able to support economic activity going forward. Now, fortunately for us, in southern Alberta, we have a better demographics profile. We have a smaller replacement generation. But my concern from a food perspective is that our farmers are essentially getting older and older. So the number of farmers we had dropped from 346,000 to 262,000 in the span of 20 years. And so yeah, that will have implications for farming. Now the other thing that is going to greatly affect us is the war with China, because China is itself in a state of decline. It is the world's workshop. We get all manner of materials and tools and things we need to power our economy and our society. And they have overcounted their population to the tune of 100 million people, and also their one-child policy, they have basically overestimated the amount of young people they have. So going forward, they're the most rapidly aging country in the world, and they are not going to be able to support their present level of activity as well. So going back to food, the things that we see happening with food is that we saw a stockpiling of all manners of foods from China for the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah, cereal grains, meats, dairy, because they saw what was happening in Ukraine with Russia. They saw the sanctions that was occurring. What would happen to them if they decide to go after Taiwan? They would have to be able to endure sanctions for a period of time. And this also led to stockpiling of raw materials, resources, metals, minerals, oil, gas, that type. So they are preparing for something. And that is something that we hope will not happen, but it's something that we should probably prepare for. So the reason why China is very important is that it supplies everything in the world. And so any type of war would destabilize that. So China is very vulnerable, and one of the triggers that could happen is a war with Iran. The battle plans of the Israelis is to bomb significant targets that would provide them with energy or income, meaning that, say for example, they're exporting terminals for crude oil to China. And China receives over 90% of their energy from Iran. So it's in China's best efforts, and they were working during the recent attacks against Lebanon and Iran and Yemen to try and quiet things down, because they didn't want their supply of energy to be affected by that. So again, the fallout from all of that is that we will lose components we need in order to maintain, to be able to grow food, and also to maintain our society. And if that occurs, we are somewhat protected against that, because there's a current reshoring and nearshoring of manufacturing from China to North America. And most of that is going on in Mexico. And so those supply lines, all those components are being built in Mexico right now. And so we kind of seen estimates that for North America, that prices for components, cars, and the like will remain elevated for the next 5 years as this reshoring takes place to Mexico. So there always has been a correlation found between energy and food growing. So if you recall during the, let's say, during the 80s and 90s, we had cheap food and whatnot. But there was a study done by the Asian Development Bank Institute, which saw 62.49% of food price variance, so basically food price increases, was due to changes or to increases in crude oil prices. So I believe that our carbon emissions are something that we should be managing and taking care of. But the way we are working towards these carbon emissions, we've kind of hobbled ourselves in the foot. And what I mean by that is that we've taken off systems that we have that provide us easy energy, and we have lost our capacity. So basically, with the impact on our systems by climate change, is created a more demand on the increase in our demand on our power capacity, and that was made more disturbing to me a couple of years ago when a friend of mine dropped by while I was working in a community garden in Raymond, and he's an electrician. He was part of the groups that would work in taking down these coal power plants, and he estimated to me that we lost our capacity by about half as opposed to 10 years ago. So I'm a little more conservative. I've done some work in looking at electrical systems. I think maybe a third is more of a better level, but beside that, it's not very promising, because right now we are facing environmental conditions in the winter, extreme cold in the summer, extreme heat that puts a very almost restrictive draw on our power system, and that's something that concerns us. And so another thing when I was at Mount Royal University, we engaged in a project where we looked at the power system and the adoption of green energy, and we found that one of the main things that we found is that there's no thoughtful planning by government or by industry in adopting these things. And so things are going on at a piecemeal deal. And so we find that we are still 20 to 30 years away, mainly because we don't simply have the components to be able to store green energy at scale. And unfortunately, with electrical vehicles, they occupy about 4% of the vehicles on the roads in North America right now. And to change that to 100%, we simply don't have enough materials to be able to do that. And our power system, the capacity, the voltage, will not also sustain electrical vehicles on a widespread scale. We need to upgrade our power system. Again, there's no thoughtful plan in doing so. So it's unlikely that that will happen. And then artificial intelligence, what you hear about artificial intelligence and its integration within our society, it requires 6 times what we have in what we can get from the power system. So we're still decades away from that. And then there's what the Russians are believing are happening right now with our climate. They believe that we're at the beginning of an ice age, and they're preparing accordingly. One, by taking their entire vegetable production and put it under greenhouses, building small-scale nuclear reactors to weather the cold events that will occur. So those are the things that we are looking at right now. And these are the things what I am doing in my jobs. So with this knowledge in mind, the solutions we are providing to society at all levels of society, from individuals, families, groups, municipalities, is to be able to mitigate climate change, mitigate what is going to happen to our systems. And we like to think that we have the answers to food hunger, world hunger. And it's not the adoption of technologies and applying that, but it's merely the fact of returning to old ways. Pre-World War, our food systems were local and personable. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to provide options to people to be able to grow their own foods, wherever they are at, what place in society, we have options, different growing options. So we've been also looking at all the great growing ideas outside of our regions, and we can provide those options. But we're also engaging in projects that also increase your access to foods, but also personal foods that will increase your health. But we're also looking forward to integrating food systems back into the landscape. So an example of this, what we envision, is that if you buy a piece of land in a town or city, that you have a farmland attached to it. And also that farmland would be able to help you provide you food. And what we're currently looking at is like ranches and farms and whatnot be attached to the land and try and provide half of your food coming from that farmland attached to that. And so it's going to take a little bit of planning there to do it in a sustainable and productive manner for everyone. So as a program, these are things that we're coming up with. These are things that we have been applying in piecemeal. But going forward, in order to accomplish what we plan on doing, instituting food systems back into the landscape, we are transitioning to a nonprofit. So we'll be able to do more, and we will be able to help people grow their own foods, and that's what I do. So, thank you.
Next week, we will have too many papers. Yeah. And will be the Lethbridge Police Service Chief, Mehid Dazed, who will speak on Lethbridge policing, 4 years of change and progress. So now it's time for the question and answer period. We ask those waiting to ask questions to please line up along the wall here. Please state your name and your question briefly. No long preludes or stories, and no more than 2 questions per questioner, please. Not long stories. We expect respectful and polite discourse. If you prefer to write your question, please write it legibly and put your name on it and hand it to me, and I can ask on your behalf. Deb, first question.
Hi, my name's Debbie Gregorash. So I used to have a huge garden, grew tons of food, traded it with people who grew other things. And then we moved to town and we have a little garden, and I'm thinking about all those other people that are maybe out on acreages that mow their huge lawns. And wouldn't it be nice if they'd make that available for other people to garden? And wouldn't it be nice if we had more community gardens in Lethbridge? But up to that point, how do we help young families learn to grow their own food? And how would we help older people who can't garden anymore but have the space? How would they go about finding someone to garden it for them and they could share the food? Okay.
So one of the benefits, one of the things that happened that we noticed with COVID is that there was a return to gardening. So in 2020, there was almost no supplies of fertilizer, peat moss, the stuff you would need to garden. That was all exhausted. And then in 2022, that same supply was increased locally. So there was a return to that. One of the things that we at Secure Your Food is we want to make growing easier for you. So we supply you options depending on, let's say, for example, you live in an apartment building. We can teach you about using buckets, container gardening, hydroponics to do indoor gardening during the winter time. Or if you live on your own home, we can teach you how to improve your soil, or also mainly avoid that and build up. So raised bed gardening. So we have a number of options in which we're able to kind of be able to provide to people and learning how to grow their own food. And also, these food systems are also accessible. So meaning that people with disabilities or issues with mobility, that we be able to provide with them options to help them continue growing their own foods. One of the things that we have is that we have plans in mind to share food. Like if a person, a homeowner, has land that he wants to use to grow food and give away, that there be kind of a, and that's kind of where we're going with our circular systems, is that we have people be able to help them grow their own foods. And it's something that we're kind of doing at the Raymond Community Gardens. We instituted Community Raymond Gardens about 3 years ago, and we have people inquiring to be able to use their foods, or use their space to grow foods. And so we're managing that, but that is something that is on our radar, and one of the systems that we're going to provide is people to be able to help other people grow food, and also teach others that way as well.
Hi, Fiona Jacobs. So I'm having trouble reconciling something you said with something other people have gone on and on about, which is that you talked about the inverted pyramid and the loss of economic activity and all this other stuff. And yet at the same time, we have a lot of push to feed the 9, 10 billion people in 2050. So how do you reconcile those, what you said, with what apparently is a motivation for a lot of genetically modified food and a few other things, like intensive cropping as opposed to, lower intensity? How do you reconcile that?
Okay. It comes down to a numbers game. So basically, what we have development in terms of synthetic fertilizers is basically enough that we can provide for our own. Now, for across the world, we actually have an example in an African country, in Madagascar, where they eliminated synthetic fertilizers, and their food system crashed. They weren't able to support their present population based on natural fertilizing means. And even if China and Russia were to reinstitute the export of synthetic fertilizers, it'd still take about 2 to 3 years for that to make an impact. And that's kind of where our view is that outside of North America, it's going to become very difficult for those people to grow their own food. And also, across the world, there has been the adoption of monocrop farming practices. So prior to that, let's say Madagascar, before employing Western practices, they were growing their own foods, their own cultural foods that were culturally relevant to them. But the way the food system is set up in the Western world is that all the periphery, all the different countries out there are meant to feed us, not them. And as a result, they've lost their cultural crops for the most part. And the adoption of GMOs also is in that mix there. That doesn't do well for them.
Thank you, Karen. Belinda Croson, thank you very much for the presentation. I certainly learned a lot. And I love the impact we're seeing more and more on trying to encourage people to grow their own food. But the part of the discussion I never see is the next part: food storage, food processing. When we were growing large vegetable gardens on the farms, we had root cellars. We had places to store it. When I tried digging a root cellar in my backyard in Lethbridge, they stopped me. I mean, right, it's not something you can do. So do we see anything about community root cellars? Do we see anything about working together in community kitchens for processing food? Has anybody gone that far? Because that's the part, I'm seeing people grow more food, but it's usually going to waste, or often going to waste, because they don't know what to do with those large gardens once they're grown.
So at the Raymond Community Garden, we also grow food for people who don't use the plots. We use that, we give that out to people. One of the next stage that we're working with the town of Raymond is to provide them with orchards inside the town. And so our plan is to preserve these. We don't let them fall to the ground. We're going to gather them and we're going to preserve them using what we drying and also freeze drying and creating food stores. So if we have any type of disasters, we're able to provide these things. Freeze drying preserves the nutrients in the foods for about 30 years. And so we'll be able to create stores of food, emergency food, for people. And that's the plan that we intend on doing with that. But we're also looking at developing what we call food security centers, where you have the ability to process foods, preserve foods, and also educate about foods, that type of thing. So right now, as a program, we're not really able to support that. As a nonprofit, we're going to work towards having that capability in the community.
My name is Terry Shellington. I'm trying to reconcile something you said with what I think I know. Did I hear you rightly that you were the Russians are talking about a mini ice age, while the rest of us are planning for global warming on one globe? I can't make any. Pardon? Yeah, but the climate change that most of us are preparing for is for a warmer planet rather than a mini ice age. So could you comment on that?
So I come from a perspective, not, I guess you could say I'm a hybrid. And I grew up in Raymond, went to school there, went to university. But I also, through my parents, experienced our heritage, culture. And so my viewpoint of climate change is different remarkably from most of the people that help and support me. I don't necessarily view climate change as hot or cold, but I do see it as more as a cycle. And also, based on the data that I've seen basically our everything become harsher. Now, whether it turns out to be more heating or cooling, I don't really know. I do know that the data supports that our climate has become harsher. And in a way, I kind of see climate change as more as unbalancing in our systems. The jet stream is not as strong as it should be. We're entering into grand solar minimum when we came out of a weak solar maximum. Typically during a solar maximum, you have better environmental conditions, but we don't have that. And so the jet stream is usually stronger during a solar maximum, meaning that we get better weather, growing weather. Again, everything we see seems to indicate that conditions are getting harsher, and that's kind of why this graph concerns us here with extreme weather, because we don't really see a leveling off. We will know more in about 10 years whether it's leveling off and we can kind of adapt to that, or if it's going to continue to get worse. And that's kind of why we develop our systems, like our greenhouses, to be able to weather most events, stuff like that. Sorry.
Thank you for your presentation, and my name is Bob Campbell. Just a couple of comments. You talked about the quality of the food after World War II, and an interesting thing to note is that with the introduction of low-fat foods, low-sugar foods, obesity rates have skyrocketed in many parts of the world. That's just an editorial comment. My question is, there is a movement towards buying local food and producing, and you talked quite a bit about that. Is there any way that there are organizations like your own here promoting that for people to shop local, buy local? And we have farmers markets and all those sorts of things. Lots of times that food is a little bit more expensive than if you go to the grocery store. I'd just like you to comment on how we can support this localization of food.
So that is a question. Security food is my second year practicum with the City of Lethbridge. My first year practicum was Bow West Community Resource Center and providing basic needs assistance to people in need. So one of my jobs was to go to the food bank in Calgary to collect foods and create a mini supermarket at the Bow West. And so when it comes to issues like those, they kind of percolate in my head, and I think them over and over again. And one of the programs that we have, in addition to having an attached farmland to a piece of land, is also buying or creating co-ops, food growing and farms that be able to supply, let's say, for example, the school lunch program that we're looking at developing. So the ideal of nonprofit grocery stores with local foods is also something we wish to develop as well. And again, we also support local growing initiatives, community gardens and stuff like that. We will working to increase the amount of growing space. We have ideals for the City of Lethbridge and using their negative spaces to have mini growing units in there, and also engaging the city in having more community gardens. So we're working on it.
Hello, I am Katie Aurora, and I'm actually the vice president of a local nonprofit called the Citizens of Lethbridge Urban Chicken Club, or CLUC for short. We are working with the city to bring hen keeping into the city itself in a way to hopefully make egg production a little more local, a little more sustainable. Sounds like something that might be right up your alley. I do have a question about grass in particular. It's actually the most farmed crop in North America. We have so many spaces that are just lawns. Like, look out the window here, right? It's lawns and grass. And it's water intensive, and it doesn't really benefit us. If we were instead to use that land for, growing crops, growing food, urban agriculture type activities, I think it's a way we could really, help ourselves bring food production even more so into the city. I'm wondering what kind of policy prescriptions at, for example, the local, municipal, even federal level that you would have to move us in that direction.
So I am aware of the work you guys have done, and I was also there supporting Kelty when she first started this and whatnot. And it is going to take some work to change that, because mainly government at this point is not really looking to develop those things. So we have to make them aware at all levels within government the need for this and the benefit of this. So as I understood it, the administration kind of stopped the hen adoption and whatnot. And mainly because they just didn't simply see the benefits or the need for it. And that's something as we as citizens have to be able to do. And that's kind of also what we do in our advocacy, especially when we begin to engage city and municipal officials on the reason and the need for this. And so one of the things that we were looking at before CLUC came to be was to adopt, to basically bring a plan to city council and administration, just detailing what we can do to help in forming an organization that would be able to provide that option. But again, you're working against the system with that, and it's going to take careful planning, and that is something that part of what we were also looking to do. So we're working on it.
My name is Klaus Jericho. Thank you very much for your very, very informative and timely subject. I have one question. Can you give us more information about what SYF is? And the other comment I have, all these things are very nice to learn how to grow food, how to prepare it, how to store it, and how to make your meals. It all takes time. And our society doesn't have time for anything anymore. That's the concern I have. I'm retired, I'm 85, and I'm trying to cut down on my garden plot because of time, and my hip is not what it used to be. But that's not funny. So these are all realities. We have time for hockey and soccer and holidays and all these things. But food production, I know, takes a lot of time.
So we've taken a look at all the great food options, growing options across the world, and we're taking note of them. And those are part of the things that we want to incorporate back into to the landscape. One of them being is that originally when security food was conceptualized, was that the plan was to have a year-round producing greenhouse in the 55 or so neighborhoods within the city of Lethbridge at that time. And that people would be able to access food from there. They would also be able to help grow the food as well. We look at China with their Japan with their plant factories. We look at Iceland with their year-round greenhouses using geothermal. We look at those options, and those are the things we're going to bring in our planning when we build out the systems we want to put back into the landscape. Another thing is kind of, like say for example, the Save-On building down there, the old Safeway building in the north side. We want to take these buildings and turn them into food growing facilities. And so, again, that's all in our planning. That's what we intend on doing. But Secure Food's main purpose is to provide access to foods, be it through education, growing information, or through our systems. So we're working to do that. The reason why this program has been self-funded is because there are no entities out there willing to do this work. Everyone has a primary, secondary responsibilities. None of the, like AHS or any of the type, would undertake what we're seeking to do. And that's why we're becoming a nonprofit.
Hi, my name is Frank Isaac. I really appreciate your presentation. You have a tremendous amount of points that we could talk about and extend out through the day. But I think we all need to be stewards of this planet and do our part in encouraging others to do the same. So are there any school programs that approach how we should work together? Or are we all focused on accounting? I just thought I'd add that.
In every region of the planet right now, there are people who are working towards providing that type of information, that type of ability, because with COVID, like I said before, there was a return to gardening and whatnot. For us, it's simply a matter of remembering old ways. Prior to supermarkets, growing food was more of a personal thing that you need to do in order to feed yourselves. And that is a responsibility that we want to help people remind themselves what they did. And one of the things that I would like to engage in is talking to seniors and talking to them about what they had done growing up when they were young. Recording those experiences and those things and share that with people. For my own cultural purposes, when we moved from one campsite to another, we had food highways. Those highways had food, berries, plants, and medicinal plants on the way. And if there was something that was competing with them, we would take those plants around for them and allow those plants to be able to flourish. So when we moved from one campsite to another, we always had food available that way. So that's kind of the ideal for the community gardens and the orchard ideal we're implementing. So we're working on it.
Hi, Bev Mundell-Atherstone. Thank you for putting a spotlight on food security. Just in regard to your numbers, Canada and China's population under age 15 is 15%, but the worldwide population under age 15 is 25%. So Canada's open immigration system should help with that, to bring in people from other countries. My question is about what you think the government's role should be in protecting Canadians from unhealthy foods, like sugar with its role in diabetes, iodine. Most recently, there's more goiters because iodine isn't added to all salts. Then salt, its role in high blood pressure, and the rise in ultra-processed foods. So do you think that the government should have stronger policies to discourage industry from producing or importing certain foods to protect us from ourselves? Thank you.
The government has actually put some effort and funding into, say, for example, school lunch programs and whatnot. But what I look at and what I see is it comes down to a lack of information at that level. So in order for change to happen, we have to be able to provide the government the rationale for that change. And unfortunately, at this time, there's a difference of opinions on what is good food and whatnot. So in the United States, I can't remember which body came out saying that processed foods were healthy for you. It's, again, comes down to information. One thing that I haven't really talked about with security of food is that not food security, but food sovereignty. So basically, your ability to determine for you what is healthy for you. Like, say, for example, what is healthy for me as a North American First Nations person is not going to be the same for someone from China or from India, the foods that they eat. So that's what food sovereignty means, is that we be able to produce our own foods. So until that time happens, we have to kind of continue to advocate for those foods that we want. So at the base level with security food is we want you to have nutritious foods. So again, we go based on what is on in the data out there supports.
So what you're predicting and proposing has already happened very much so in Cuba. When the USSR fell apart, they stopped sending pesticides, oil, gas, fertilizer, and Cuba was high and dry. And I had the opportunity of having a biotech tour of Cuba, and it was amazing of how they turned around and did everything that you're proposing. Family gardens, high school kids bused to potato farms and digging the potatoes. Can you imagine our teenagers? Where would they put their cell phones if they had to dig potatoes? You know. So anyway, it's an amazing story, and it's really worthwhile to see what they did, how they did. They started growing their own biopesticides. Just a cottage industry, just at the farms, were growing their bacteria or fungi that were killing their insects, etc. So it's an amazing story of how Cuba got themselves out of hunger, starvation, really. Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much. Would you have a take-home message or for us to wrap it up?
I kind of fell into this mainly through the lens of disaster management. And basically, I look at this, what I presented to you is basically a hazard analysis. And with a hazard analysis, you build your strategies going forward based on it. Again, I want to reassure you, we're going to continue to have access to foods because we are a fruitful and productive nation. And we have the components necessary to ensure that. But we can do better. Information is growing around that to be able to grow your own food. And we're happy to be part of that. And we hope to become a more integrated part, and you'll continue to hear more and more about what we do going forward. But at the very Least of it, I would like you to consider growing more food, your own food. Start small, get better, and grow more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, just a reminder, March 5th at the Southminster's Church at 6 p.m. I'd like to see you all come over and join us in the panel discussion. And also next week, we'll have the police chief speak to us. Thank you.